chapter 11, verse 6, Jesus then stayed 2 days longer in the place where he was. He remained. Jesus intentionally stayed where he was, even after hearing about Lazarus' sickness. This wasn't neglect. It wasn't because he didn't care. He loved Lazarus. It was because he was busy doing God's work where he was. And he was waiting for perfect divine timing that would bring God the greatest honor and glory. As bad as we are at listening, I know you didn't hear that part. That's right. That's good. We are also bad at staying, and especially staying that involves long suffering. Ooh. Ouch. Jesus, though often on the move, deliberately stayed where he was. His waiting wasn't passive, it was purposeful. He was aligning his schedule with God's timing. God waits and we are impatient. And that's a struggle for you and I. It's a struggle for me. Please, my friends, don't pray for patience for me. I don't want patience, Lord. I want to be delivered from the need of patience. Patience is hard for us, and it seems like it's getting more and more difficult. I think every generation has a shorter attention span. When I was at the university, they talked about how in the 80s, the attention span of the student was 20 minutes. So lectures were geared around a 20-minute loop. You could hold a student's attention for 20 minutes, then you had to give them a reason to take a mental break. Tell a little story, make a little joke, fall down, right? It explains most of my behavior up here. At the university, we talked about how that 20 minutes had shrunk down to 12. That when attention span was tested for the 20 and 30-year-olds in college, it was 12 minutes. Every 12 minutes, you need a reason to think about something else before I can refocus you on what's important. They were just doing the next study at the high school level and found that it looked like it had shifted from 12 minutes to 8. 8 minutes. So generationally, our attention span is getting shorter and shorter and shorter. I know you weren't listening to any of that. Right here, our attention span is getting shorter and shorter and shorter. Our desire not to wait and stay is getting more and more powerful. We've got to be on the move. Forget the grass is always greener over there. I've been here for 8 minutes. It's time to go somewhere else. Jesus is showing the power of remaining and long suffering. God is working in the waiting. There's a reason why we need to stay and remain where we are. His delays are not denials. It's not a no. It's a wait. It's often connected to his bigger plan. When God does something beautiful, something mind-blowing, something miraculous and awesome, especially when it impacts you or me, we are so grateful and thankful for that intervention. But here's what God often does. He'll do something miraculous and beautiful in your life to benefit you, to help you because he loves you. But he's often working in a larger group than you realize. It's the splatter effect. So he'll do something beautiful for you, but he's impacting 50 people around you, and we are too self-absorbed in our own frustration that is so real that we don't notice the other people around us being impacted by God's miracle. Higher glory, greater glory. God's got things in the works, and he's shifting people and schedules, time and places around so that when he drops this blessing, it has the greatest possible impact. And all he asks from you and I in the midst of that is to stay and wait. Stay and wait. Try not to help him. Because when we try to help him, we do. When I first got married, I thought I had to figure out how to be the handyman of the house. Right? It's hilarious. Yeah. Right? It's the man of the house that, whatever. You know, I can't change a light bulb. I'm the only person I know that tries to paint a patch on the wall and somehow cuts himself and ends up in the ER. Anytime something is broke in our house, in our vehicles, anything, rather than me try to help and therefore make a $60 repair, a $600 repair, I just step back and immediately go for help. I know there are a lot of you who are very, very handy. I am envious of that. And you can fix stuff and you know your area of expertise. But if you take that and apply it to trying to help God out, you will almost always make it worse. You'll turn a $60 fix into a $600 fix, into a $6,000 fix, and wonder how you had done that. While everybody around you is going, we told him not to do that. We told him, you can buy that part at Home Depot, but you shouldn't, you know. We try to help out God, and then we make it worse. Instead of staying where we're at, calling the expert repairman and waiting for that expert repairman to show up and do master work on our problem. That'd be God, by the way, right? There are so many examples of remaining instead of jumping ship, because we are fast to just, I'm gone. Joseph remained faithful when his family betrayed him and sold him into slavery. He became the most honored, the most respected, the most empowered slave in the household. He didn't jump on the railroad to the north. He didn't flee. He could have. He didn't. He stayed. He was falsely accused of a crime he didn't commit and sent to prison. He didn't try to escape. He became the best inmate, the best. He stayed where he was. He even made suggestions to inmates getting out. Could you tell? Could you tell I'm still here? Get me out? Joseph, in a state of suffering in a way that you and I will never know. Betrayal by his family, sold into slavery, falsely accused and in prison. He stayed faithful in that place. And then, of course, you know what happens to Joseph. God lifts Joseph up from national prison to the second most powerful person in the land, and then reunites him with his dysfunctional family. Maybe a blessing, maybe not. Joseph handles it so well, it's beautiful. He stayed. We've got such a short attention span. We want immediate relief. If this doesn't work out in 6 weeks, I'm gone. Me. It made me think of William Carey. William Carey, a British Baptist, he felt called by God to go to India. He's known as the father of modern missions. He felt the missionary call to take the gospel of Jesus Christ to the subcontinent of India. He was in India for 7 years without any evidence or fruit of him being there. Can you imagine 7 years with nothing to show for it? He could have gone home. He could have blamed it on whatever. 7 years. It took 7 years before he got his first Hindu convert, the first Indian to come to faith in Jesus Christ. 7 years. Imagine working for the Lord for 7 years before you see the slightest glimmer of evidence that there's been any fruit of your effort. Not only that, he not only waited 7 years for this first convert, but then he stayed for 4 decades. Nowadays, if you even endured for 7 years, finally got one convert, you shout, "Praise the Lord, I'm going home." And then you could go home and say, "I converted," He stayed for 4 decades. Now that's a man that knew that you grow where you're planted. That God's got you where you're at, living among the people you're living with, working where you're working, in the church that you're in on purpose. Even if it takes 7 years for a convert. Even if we have to have the longest prayer meeting in history to see God's hand move. I've got a buddy, Frank Blodgett. Frank Blodgett's one of my friends, one of my mentors. He's got to be 90 now. But Frank planted a church. He dedicated his life and his family to the work of planting a church in this town. And he planted the church and then he pastored the church for 20 years. He was faithful for 2 decades with this new church start he was working on. And then they fired him. And it devastated Frank. And Frank could have done anything. He's from Wisconsin. He could have gone back to Wisconsin. He could have moved anywhere. He could have started anything. He could have fled from that place of pain. Instead, what he did was he went from once a month prison ministry at the local prison to doing that full time. So that he spent 20 years doing full-time ministry in prison. He was faithful for 2 decades. He was abused and violated and shamed by his friends, family, and congregation, which would have caused anybody to run to heal his wounds. But instead, he stayed and remained and served in the community that God had called him to, staying so faithful. Frank. Love Frank. What a good guy. We can't relate to any of these. In reading the first 7 verses of chapter 11, we would think Jesus should have left immediately. Why'd he stay? We can't relate to somebody with 300 children and no food and sitting down at the dinner table and praying for manna to fall from heaven. We can't relate to that. We can't relate for praying for 7 years of snow. Don't you dare do that. We can't relate for spending 7 years working in a field of rocks and pavement and never having a single stalk of wheat growing. We can't relate to being abused, wounded, shamed, and instead of fleeing, staying and still serving the Lord in the same community. We need to know how to love selflessly and sacrificially. We need to know how to listen and pray with the assumption that God is listening. And we need to learn how to stay, my friends. Let's trust that God's got this. Let's put our faith, our belief, our trust in action by realizing that the grass is only greener because there's more fertilizer. And as soon as we get over there, we'll see all the bald spots, look back across the fence and realize we had just left someplace that was more greener. Let's act and live, make decisions, speak, think in a way that expresses our trust in God, especially when it comes time to staying where we're at and saying no to opportunities to go, realizing that those are actual traps. If you want to see God work in huge, beautiful ways and express trust and faith in Him like missionaries and super saints, then let's start by being faithful in small things, because you and I are called to a lifestyle of great faith, belief, and trust. And we settle for small faith, belief, and trust. So let's be faithful in small things and grow those muscles, as it were. See God be faithful and get more and more confident, as it were. Jesus remained in order to seek God's greater glory. And we know what that looks like because we've read chapter 11. Maybe we, you and me, should make daily decisions, not based on what's best for me, but let's make decisions about what will bring God the greatest glory, honor, and praise. Imagine that being our first thought in decision making. Not me, but God. Not what makes me happy, but what will bring God the greatest amount of glory. When we can do that, my friends, then we are walking in the footsteps of Jesus. Then we are growing to be a mature disciple of His.